Hello and welcome to this video where
Hello.
we're going to talk about compression. So what is compression and why would you use it? So Christopher, what is compression? I know there's two different types of compression.
Yeah.
Could you briefly just go over what these actually are?
Yeah, so the compression that we're going to explain in this video is the compression that you apply to a track in your project, like in terms of a plugin. The other type of compression is like when you compress the file down to an MP3, like from a WAV file, to reduce the file size. That isn't the compression that we're going to talk about. That is a type of compression, but totally different to dynamic range compression, which we're going to talk about in this video.
So if you're in the track and someone says put a compressor on the kick drum, this type of compression.
Yeah, so that's dynamic range compression. So first of all, we should talk about what dynamic range is, aka dynamics. So the dynamics of a signal, let's say you've got a vocal track and she sings very quietly and she sings very loud in that track. That track has relatively large dynamics. Dynamics refer to the variances in level,
So
like
the quiet point to the loud point.
Yeah, so the dynamic range is basically the difference between the quiet points and the louder points. That's very dynamic, or it has a lot of dynamics. That signal does, and compression manages the dynamics of a signal. Yeah.
Effectively.
Yeah. Effective in 99% of cases, it reduces the dynamics, which is why it's called compression. But the easiest way to kind of understand what compression is imagine you are recording a singer. You're in a studio. You are recording a singer, and she's about to sing really, really loudly, and just before she starts doing that, you start pulling the fader down. You've compressed the signal. That's what you did, and that's what a compressor does. It's like an automatic volume automation, but it happens so automatic and so quickly in a way that you can't really do that, but can actually change the sort of tonal qualities, the overall qualities of the audio, because it happens in such a small time frame. Or it can happen in a large time frame as well, but compression is basically just managing the dynamics. So it's, she's singing really, really loudly now, so let's turn it down. And the benefits of that are it allows you to, it helps the mix, because if she's singing really loudly at some points, then she might pop out of the mix. If she sings really quietly, she might fall back into the mix, you can't hear what she's saying. So when you're mixing, and sometimes when you're mastering as well, you'll compress the signal, because it helps with translation, it helps with balance and stuff like that. So yeah, that's overall what dynamic range compression is, what a compressor does when you load that plugin inside your DAW, inside your project, and that's what's happening to it. Now, a lot of people say compression makes things louder, which is not exactly true.
If you're using it correctly, it shouldn't make stuff louder.
No,
that's what the makeup gain's for, really.
Yeah, that's what the reason people say it makes things louder is because you can compress the signal and make the average level louder, because otherwise this peak would clip. So if you're bringing the peak down and then you turn up the gain afterwards, you can achieve a greater average loudness, because otherwise that would be clipping before this lower signal gets loud enough to help. So yeah, that's where people misunderstand that, to the point where if they just want to turn up a signal and there's not enough fader, they put a compressor on it, where they could just load a gain stage. And that's one thing that people completely miss, actually. They go for compressors because everyone just talks about compressors more, but they forget actually gain. Gain and compression are actually related. So compression is actually automatic gain, like automated gain adjustments plus plus gain, negative gain. The compressor is automatically doing that. But just simple gain, like the fader on your channel, or if you actually load a gain utility or a trim utility, as they're called in some places, that just turns up or down the entire signal without changing the dynamics. So if this is the dynamics, You know, gain will turn it down and gain will turn it up. It doesn't change the qualities of that signal. You know?
So there's certain dials on the compressor I think a lot of people get confused by. Could you explain what ratio means?
I'll start with threshold.
Okay.
So is the level at which the compressor starts working. So going back to the analogy of you in a studio and she's singing in the live room, the threshold is the point where you go, okay, this is it. This is the level that I want to start turning down at. That is the threshold.
When the signal goes past that certain level,
Yeah.
the compressor will turn it down.
The compressor starts
It'll
reducing.
start working.
Yeah, it starts reducing gain to
Yeah.
compensate. So that's you going, oh my god, she's singing quite quietly or singing quite loud. She's about to sing really loud, so I'm going to start turning it down. That level that you decide to start turning it down is the threshold, which is normally expressed in a decibel level. You know, a decibel relative to full scale level in digital, minus 10 decibels or something like that. And then the ratio is how much you reduce it by. So let's take a simple ratio of 2 to 1. 2 to 1 means that for every 2 decibels above the threshold, only 1 decibel is going to come out. So if the threshold's at minus 10 and the ratio is at 2 to 1, okay, so minus 10, 2 to 1, and then the signal comes in, the input signal, the vocalist, she starts singing at minus 8. Now that minus 8 difference to minus 10 is 2. The ratio at 2 to 1 goes, okay, that's now down to minus 9. So for every 2 dBs above the threshold now is only 1 dB above the threshold, 2 to 1.
So if you want a really gentle compression, where would you have the ratio? And if you want extreme compression, where would you have the ratio?
Okay, so gentle compression, you would have a low ratio but a low threshold as well. So that it's just gently modulating or changing the level. But if you want really, aggressive but specific peak handling, for example, you might have a really high threshold because you only want it to tackle the top range of the dynamics, but the compression is like, the ratio is like 10 to 1. So if it's like 10 dBs over the threshold, it just clamps it down, and that's basically a limiter. A limiter is basically really high ratio. The threshold is basically at 0 or minus 1, and it stops any peak values exceeding the threshold. It just clamps them down basically immediately, which is why it's often used at the end of the chain or in mastering, because you don't want to put out a file that's going to clip on playback, but you don't want to reduce the gain so far that it's not loud enough. So
a lot of compressors have built-in limiters as well.
They do, yeah. I never ever use them though, ever. I don't
Prefer having it separate.
I want it separate because I might want a gain stage after it.
Okay. Could you explain what attack and release means in the compressor?
So the attack is just how quickly that gain reduction goes into full effect. So signal came in above the threshold. The attack in milliseconds is how quickly it reduces the gain to the amount that the ratio decided.
So if you wanted to compress really quickly, obviously have a short attack time.
Short attack, yeah.
Longer compression, take longer to compress, longer compress time.
Yeah, like if you, a very common motivation to set like an attack that isn't basically instant is because you're compressing the drums, or you're compressing anything, but you don't want it to, like if you compress a vocal and the attack is just too short, it will just kill the consonants of the vocal performance, because you want those to pop through still, but you want to control the body of the note, if that makes sense. So
yeah.
When she uses consonants like T's and P's and etc., you don't want those to just flatten, because it will just ruin, it will really hurt the signal. But you want to keep those in so that the attack is just slow enough to keep those happening, but controls the body of the note that she sings, But yeah, you just adjust it to the material, really.
What about release?
The release is how quickly, the signal is not reducing gain anymore or just changing gain anymore. Different compressors kind of work differently in terms of release, but the premise is, and it works instantly actually, how quickly the release is just how quickly the compressor stops working after the attack has happened. Simple as that.
Sure. What about makeup gain? Why would you use makeup gain?
So compression is turning down the vast majority of compressors are turning down the signal, which is going to actually make it quieter. So you use a makeup gain to compensate for that adjustment in loudness, so that when you are toggling the bypass of that compressor, it's still the same loudness to your perception, so that you can be objective about, is this actually helping? Because if it's too quiet, if the compression is making it too apparently quieter, you're just probably going to think it sounds worse or weaker.
Yeah, a lot of the time, if something's louder, your mind gets tricked and thinks it's better.
The loudness bias will generally make you think it's better, or if it's quieter, worse. If you're doing if the gain reduction, so the gain reduction is just how much negative gain is being applied to the signal. You'll normally see that in a needle that goes from 0 down to -1 or 3 or whatever.
So if the needle goes like this, and the needle goes like this, what's the difference?
Well, the difference
Normally
is
attack.
the difference is attack, release, but not just those two things, but actually the signal, because all of this is relative to the thing that's going in. If the thing spends a long time above the threshold, that thing's going to be slower. So you have to bear in mind that how the compressor works isn't just about the compressor, it's what goes in. What goes in is part of the formula of how the compressor works. So there are many variables to that. Generally, the release is going to determine how far back it goes there, but then it's also the attack is happening as the release is happening as well. As a general rule, one piece of guidance that I can give, but this doesn't always apply. But if you're not entirely sure what you're doing and you're new to compression, then have this as a general rule that if it spends a long time below the threshold and it's always lower than -3 or -4, it's never going back to 0, just be mindful of that, because if it does all of a sudden go back to 0 because the level of the signal going in has come back enough, you might get a weird pump, a weird swell in the signal, and you don't know why that's happening. So investigate that issue knowing that. But so the makeup gain is just to compensate for the reduction that the compressor is doing to the signal. And that's basically it.
The essentials, yeah.
That's the bare bones skeletal of what a compressor does. However, I could make another 20 of these videos, and I still haven't done all of the things that compression does.
So, could you give a quick recap now for someone watching who's brand new to compression, what a compressor is?
A compressor automates the volume, the level of the signal. It manages it. It tames the dynamics. So if it's going up and down too much, it reduces that difference and helps it sit in the mix.
Okay.
better.
So why would you use a compression, and when would you not use a compressor?
You use it to solve a problem. Like all of these plugins, they're problem solvers.
Yeah. Don't just use it for the sake of it.
Yeah. If you don't have a problem, it's like hammering a nail into something that doesn't need a nail hammered into it. You're just breaking it. You do it because you're mixing. Just one of a myriad of examples, but you do it because you're mixing, and she's just falling into the back of the mix, and sometimes she's just popping out of the mix. So that large variance in dynamics, you need to reduce that, compress it. That's the ultimate, most basic example of why you would use a compressor. But there are many, including more sonic characteristic stuff, like you want to actually change the sound of a drum bus or a drum itself, because really fast compression starts to eat into the actual properties of the sound. And I could go on forever. Really.
So that's it.
And I won't.
That's the basics of compression. I hope you found this video useful. Thank you, Christopher. Comments, questions,
It's
feedback?
always my pleasure to talk about dynamics and compression.
Yeah, thank you for watching, and we'll hopefully talk to you soon.
Thank you.